Today we're going to be talking about tariffs. Yes, tariffs. I know. Get excited, everybody. But seriously, I do think tariffs are a very current problem that has been talked about many times over the past 7 or 8 years. And I just want to delve into a little bit, look at the stats, look at the history of it, so that hopefully you guys, if you don't know about tariffs, have a little bit better of an understanding and maybe a little bit of nuance to it, but we'll see. Anyways, before I get into that, I just want to respond to some comments that I had on the last video. This one guy had 3 comments. I already responded to one of them. The other one I'm going to make into a video about gender discrepancy. And then the other comment was in response to my last video, which was about human bias and specifically talking about curiosity in the classroom, because I was arguing that curiosity was kind of not really... It's not talked about. It's not. You don't get curious in school, I feel like. At least I didn't, and I know a lot of other people didn't. And I was arguing that teachers should talk about more about the unknown so that people become curious and think, hey, we got a lot of things to figure out still. We got a lot of shit to fix. Let's look at what we don't know and let's see if we can figure out ways to try and solve that. And he said that testing and strict curriculums are to blame. I agree with that. He also said it's an undervalued position. If we treat teachers like lawyers or doctors, both socially and financially, then we might actually have a perfect cycle of producing amazing, wonderfully intelligent and curious people. I agree that increasing wages across the board would be good. I don't think it should be quite to the level of lawyers or doctors, and why. I just simply don't think there's much of a workload. And I understand that in society, they should be held up to the highest standard because they're teaching our children. But there are other ways to hold them up than just by pay. And my other thing is that in my area, teachers get paid about $90 to $100K on average. On the US scale, they get paid on average about $60K. It's a little bit of a range, give or take 5,000, but whatever. And my teachers say that they're very happy with their $90 to $100K salary. They're content. They're able to pay for what they need. They could be the only one working in the family, and they're able to pay for what they need. I also live in a very cheap area. Like, cost of living in general is very cheap, so that's another thing to look into, I guess. So I really don't have a great tap in on this in terms of statewide. I will say that I still think that teachers should be talking about the unknown, because it's not. That's something you could change in the still within the confines of the curriculum. But I also kind of agree that school itself on a fundamental level it's not educating the people in the way that we want. Anyways, let's actually get into the tariffs. Sorry for that little preamble, but I want to respond to all comments. So again, if you have any comments in this video, please write them down. Be respectful. Anyways, tariffs. Okay, just to give a brief history on tariffs. Okay. It is true. We did have tariffs early on in America's history. And not only that, it did produce to most of our revenue. I think it was about 95% for some years, which is, that was absolutely insane. Anyways, these tariffs were, mainly, they were, some of them were protective, some of them weren't. But mainly this was more of a source of revenue, and the tariffs today are more protectionist. And if you don't know what protectionist means, it's basically the idea that it's protecting certain industries. The theory behind it is that if you're able to tariff other countries, which means putting a tax on imported goods, then it becomes more important for your country to be focused on those industries. For example, if you tariff, let's say, on steel, let's say you have a 50% tariff on steel. So that is a 50% thing that you have to pay when it gets imported, right? That supposedly would but it would require, in most cases, the steel industries in America to start producing their own steel instead of importing it from outside countries. So it's basically trying to make everything made in our country, have no imports, is what you would try to get to, but obviously that would be impossible, considering also America is the biggest importer in the world, and still is, I'm pretty sure. That might be wrong. Correct me if I'm wrong on that, please. I will always try to acknowledge if I think that it might not be accurate information. So I just want to make that important. Anyways, so tariffs were a really big debates in early American history. Specifically, there was this one man, Henry Clay, who was a U.S. he was a House of Representatives, right? Now that's very important that he's House of Representatives, because right now Trump as president is imposing tariffs, which was just deemed unconstitutional by the Supreme Court, if you guys didn't know that. So right now, as of current, there's a 10% tariff across the board, okay? And that is from February of this year and it'll last 150 days. I think it was late February. So that's the current tariff we have now. So at least you guys now note that. At least that's the current day, okay? So looking back at these older tariffs is important because you have to understand why they're doing the tariffs. As I mentioned earlier, there's protectionist tariffs and then there's revenue increasing tariffs. Early on in American history, pretty much all of them were solely revenue. Now, this is where Henry Clay was interesting, is because his tariffs were more protectionist. And actually, they were deemed, it's kind of a funny little historical fact, but they were deemed the tariff of abominations as of 1832. So it was about a 60% tariff on imported goods, on most imported goods. So that's about 6x what it is right now. That is absolutely bonkers. I mean, I can't believe that. It's just like, we think right now is crazy. I mean, it was crazy at one point, but you also have to remember that in 1832, the Industrial Revolution didn't happen. We didn't have automobiles. We didn't have the most important industries yet. Like, the industries that are so vital to the U.S. economy now weren't even invented yet. So I think it's really hard to look at that. And the reason I'm bringing up the history is specifically because Trump has said in the past that tariffs he's used it as a historical thing that we need to get back to. It's something that we've used in the past. It's one of the reasons why our economy is bad now is because we stopped using them. Well, it's not quite that simple, you know. And it was heavily debated in the U.S. during the first 50 years or so. But by the time, I think it was about right after World War II, the U.S. became practically a free trade country, right? No tariffs for the most part. Now, there's little geopolitical tariffs, and now these are very important too, because I think this is where it gets confusing for people, because it's easier to just think of tariffs as a blanket tariff, which is what Trump has proposed in the past and what is currently on the board, but a lot less than it was, which is you're tariffing everything, right? Now, if you use geopolitical strategy, then you could target those tariffs to specifically help certain industries. Now, specifically, and by the way, this is from a YouTuber, Atriac. I'm giving him credit. I know it's a YouTuber, and it's probably not the greatest source of information, but I actually do kind of trust him on this kind of thing. But this is the only thing from him that I'm taking into this. I want to give credit where it's due. He says that when geopolitically putting tariffs on something, if you do it to a country like China on specifically automobiles, that could be considered a war strategy. And now, seems confusing at first. How the hell would car manufacturing have to do with war? But actually, car factories are one of the easiest things to turn into war production if a war were to start with China. You know what I mean? So having that infrastructure there is actually very important. So I will say that could be made as an argument. Now, this is what Atriac said, and I do agree with him on this, is that it's limiting competition. These tariffs, whether or not it's increasing the production here, it's not increasing jobs, and I'll get into that too. And it's decreasing competition, and I would heavily argue that. Specifically with the cars, because companies like Tesla aren't being challenged by Chinese electric car companies when they should be. They should be. It should be as competitive as possible. Competitive capitalism is easily the best form. You never want these companies to just have no competition. That's when they become bloated. That's when they become not innovative. That's when they turn into companies like Tesla, where they're not really even doing, like, what the hell has Tesla done in the past 5 years? And considering that, looking at that, and then seeing what Chinese electric cars have done with like Waymo, Xiaomi, it's like it's not even a comparison. They're miles better, and many people agree with that. So to me, it's a lack of competition that it's creating. And okay, here's where tariffs have been used in the past when there's been economic downturns. Now, if you guys are familiar with the Depression, the Great Depression, in 1929, when the crash happened, Hoover put in an act sought to raise import by 20%. Okay, this was his goal. They declined by a little over 60% by imposing these tariffs. It also possibly contributed to European bank failures. See, it's like these tariffs never seem to actually achieve the goal that they want to, except for early America when it was producing mainly revenue. Now, I tried understanding an economist breakdown of the current tariffs today. And what I've gathered is, hold on, I got it in a notes on my computer. Yes, I have notes on my notebook, and then I have notes on my computer. It is the worst system possible, but I don't really care. Trump's tariffs have small increases in steel and aluminum production. Now, this is very misleading. Steel and aluminum production has gone up within America. That is true. But these industries are heavily automated, meaning it's not increasing jobs. Some people think that the increase in production means an increase in jobs. It's not quite that simple. You could argue there's a small increase, but it's minuscule comparative. Now, the jobs that you could say got impacted heavily, the most important one is farmers. Farmers have been impacted significantly by this. And the reason isn't because of necessarily the tariffs that Trump imposed, but it's the response from China that was imposed on us. So now we've started this retaliation shit, and now we got to deal. Oh, it's like, it's all a mess. Now, if there's one thing to take away from all of this, I would say that, and this seems to be legitimately the common consensus of many economists, so I really don't feel uncomfortable saying this in any type of way, is that these tariffs are really bad for one main reason, and it's that for businesses to operate functionally, they have to have long-term, consistent economic policy, okay? Things have to stay relatively the same, right, within policy in the government. But once that is shaken up like it has been, the whole thing's kind of thrown out the window, because we just had 80 years of basically free trade, and then all of a sudden we're getting placed with heavy tariffs. Now, those tariffs have been heavily reduced to about 10%. But before that, that shock is still going to have ripple effects into the next coming years. Like, these things, even if it's a short period of time, are so shocking to the economy that they will have ripple effects later down the line. Like, we have to recognize that, and I think that's the most important takeaway from this whole thing. Yes, tariffs can be used strategically. They can be. And it's not just with cars either. That was just my one example because That's how I got it explained to me from someone else, if, in all honesty. But yeah, I just think it's important to recognize also the history of it too, because I think people are under the misconception that tariffs have always been about protectionism. It's not entirely true. Yes, there was talks about it back in the day, back in the 1800s, but most of those never really came to fruition, and the ones that did, like the tariff of abominations, is the tariff of abominations. All right, guys. Hope you learned a little bit today. I could go deeper into the stats of this. The problem is with something like this is I just have such a surface level understanding, but I still think that surface level understanding might be a little bit more nuanced than an average person. I hope. I hope that I gave a little bit of knowledge. But obviously, if you know something different, please respond in the comments. Again, be respectful, and also make sure if you're gonna have a rebuttal, make sure that it's mostly accurate, because I'm not gonna spend my time fact checking someone else's stuff. Anyway, sorry. I've just had I've had multiple YouTube channels over the years. This is actually like my fourth one. I probably uploaded about 1,500 YouTube videos overall, and yeah, I've had to deal with some people. So this is a very different format for me. I'm not editing these two. So screw that, bro. Fuck editing. All right, I'm ending the video.